Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. And we're kind of going back to talking tech a little bit on this podcast, which we've done an awful lot over the years with tech platforms, but today's it definitely stands out to me as unique. I can't recall that we've had specifically a tech platform that does what the guys do that we're going to be talking to today. So we may as well dive straight into it. And I'm going to welcome, not just as the first time guest on this podcast, but as a first time guest on any podcast, I'm told, just before we hit record. So everybody take a deep breath and give your warmest virtual welcome to Mr. Chris Carter. Chris is the CEO and the founder of Eventwise. Chris, a warm welcome to the podcast.
Hi, everyone. How you doing?
Yeah, and relax. This is easy. We're going to chat for 25
Great.
minutes or so, and you won't even know it's happening. You can go back to your to the rest of your day. Yeah, thanks for
Great.
joining us today. And as I said in the introduction, Chris, I've spoken to a lot of tech platforms, a lot of event tech platforms over the last 10 years or so on the podcast, but yours is unique. Tell us a little bit about Eventwise and what it is that you actually do.
Yeah, sure. Eventwise is an all-in-one financial management solution specifically designed for the events industry. So it does you create your budgets, you create different scenarios, you then have your sales revenue dashboard, your ticket counts, purchase orders, purchase control. You have reporting across the whole system, and essentially it sort of brings everything into one place rather than it replaces spreadsheets. Is what everyone uses at the moment.
Absolutely. And I guess that the next and most obvious question to me is why? You know, is your background events? Is it in finance? How did it come about?
Yeah, sure. So I think right at the beginning, I was a promoter myself at in Bristol. We set up Bed on Mondays, which is probably the most popular student night in Bristol, and still running. I was first off promoter, then I wanted to get into accounting, so did some work at Motion Nightclub. Went into London and started working for artist booking agency, and they had 6 or 7 of the best underground artists ever. Probably they're still going ahead, but then I sort of focused more towards the event side. Artist is great, but as an accountant, for an artist, you're just they just send you sort of a bag of receipts. You're not really key in their sort of day-to-day life, but in events, you're really part of the team because you're doing it from start to finish.
Sure.
So you're creating budgets, you're helping put out fires throughout the year, and you're trying to make a success and make the event profitable, which is hard. It's really difficult since COVID. So we really feel like we're part of the team and we have that passion around it. So it's definitely the sort of focus that we want to go down.
I'm pleased that you said that sort of almost straight off the bat, because obviously we're going to talk today about Eventwise, about the platform, what it does, how it was created, etc., etc. But the point that you've just made there about being part of the event team, a lot of people would see as the accounts department in any sort of big media company or events company. They do the accounts, and I guess my instinct is to say that often it's overlooked as to how important that team or that person may be in actually shaping the events that organization is putting on. People would think, oh, they just deal with the invoices and pay some bills and things like that. But, straight away, what you've said is that you're an integral part in helping to shape how those events ultimately are going to manifest themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone that I've employed has to have, in terms of the bookkeeper's side, has to have some sort of passion in terms of music. They're either DJs who decide to go down accounting, or part of a band, or just love going to festivals. And I feel like them getting involved in it gives them more sort of passion and drive to help those events get over the line.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating to hear straight
advice as well. So it's more kind of personal advice.
Fascinating that you've straight away said that as well, about bringing people in that have, ultimately that insight into what you're trying to do. It's okay bringing somebody in who's good with numbers, who might have a maths degree and is qualified accountant, or whatever it may be, but actually having people there who understand the pitfalls, the trappings, where, you know, there could be stuff that they need to flag up early so that people don't get caught out. You know,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
that sort of boots on the ground insight is invaluable, I guess.
Yeah, especially for the accounts team where you're not really within their team. You're always, well, for us, we're always outsourced. You know, we're in Cheltenham, sometimes in London, and so we never really. It's all over kind of Zoom or
Mm,
meetings or email and things like that. So to kind of be able to give advice and sort of feel like you're part of the team, even though you're based somewhere completely different, it's really important.
absolutely. And let's move on to talking about Eventwise. You know, the last decade or so has seen, you know, hundreds of tech platforms spring up doing all manner of weird, wonderful, critical, sometimes not so critical, but important things for events. And organizers have become very, very used to using tech platforms and migrating away from, you know, we've always used event tech, arguably, you know, as long as we've been on computers and computer based in running events, we've had, you know, spreadsheets in the early days, word processing to type our letters. So tech platforms in some respect are not new, but tech platforms that integrate, that make things just that bit easier, really sort of the last decade or so. And why create something like Eventwise, and when did that journey start?
Yeah, so I started concentrating on doing accounts for festivals probably two or 3 years before COVID. Set up these really good spreadsheets on Google Sheets, so it was more of like a work in progress sheet rather than an Excel file that's going back and forth. And the structure of that was great. I felt like I was sort of getting a few clients because of it, and sort of how we managed the budgets and things like that. And then during COVID, I always thought that it's hugely time consuming. Firstly,
Mhm.
setting up these budgets, getting them involved, everyone on board using them, and then keeping them updated in terms of what happens with actuals in the finance. So how much has been paid, whether it's been purchase ordered, whether it's been refunded, has that actually happened? The sales, has anything been refunded in sales? What's the kind of reconciliation with that in terms of the ticket seller's site and on your accounting side? It's just impossible, and you're basically, it's always not live. So as soon as you update all the sheets, it's already not live because it's
Yeah.
already takes like a day or two to update it,
Mm.
and then you're constantly chasing your tail. So during COVID, obviously all my clients had events cancelled. Some had cancellations for 2 years.
Yeah.
So that's when I would say, just went straight into trying to build a tech platform, which my wife would probably tell me it was the worst idea in the world because of the amount of time it's taken, 5 years down the line now. But I truly believe, in fact, we've cracked it. Obviously, trying to replace a software which probably one of the most powerful softwares ever created, apart from AI, which is a spreadsheet. Trying to replace that has been pretty tough, but
Mm.
I think now we've kind of done it, and we've designed it specifically for creatives. So it has to be built in a way that it's not so spreadsheety. You know, we want the arts and the creative budget holders to work on it, as well as the finance, the artist bookers, etc. So it has to be built in a way that it's not too complicated, but it has to be robust and structured and things like that.
Sure. Because people in artistic industries and creatives are notoriously also the people that are terrible at doing their bookkeeping or keeping up to date with their accounts or filling in the right numbers. You know, you show a
Yeah,
creative a spreadsheet, and I'll show you a creative who's running very fast indeed a lot of the time, or just avoiding it to the last possible minute and then ramming a load of numbers in there in the hope that they're vaguely accurate. So, by the sounds of
yeah.
things, a lot of this has been designed to sort of take away some of that, I suppose, instinctive panic that creatives feel when they're looking at the sort of the admin side of things.
Yeah, so they also think that their spreadsheet is the best spreadsheet, whereas actually it sort of just tells you this is what it is.
Mm,
Cost, like fencing, £2,000. That's it. Whereas that's great if you can just build on that, but actually that doesn't give you any information of what actually is happening with the event. It doesn't sink back into anything. So it's trying to move them away from their kind of spreadsheet into a spreadsheet that works for everyone, but also most importantly, we can make decisions based off the main P&L, which is for the directors essentially.
Sure. And how does it present itself back on the actual platform itself? Because, well, anybody listening to this, there's nobody who hasn't used a spreadsheet, so they'll be familiar with the layout, and they can be, fundamentally pretty boring to look at and can get really complex, the bigger they get. You're just looking at a stack of numbers or letters in cells. How does it actually present itself back? And by presenting it back in a different manner, how does then an organizer interpret that?
Yeah, sure. So essentially what we've done is we've scaled back what people see day to day. So it's literally just the item, so fencing, the estimate, which is the start of the year planning number, and sort of a work in progress budget figure.
Yeah.
That's all that you can see. You can see more if you want, but then if you click a little button, a sidebar pops out with loads of information that might be a bit overwhelming for some people, but you don't need to look at it basically. So we've really stripped it back, so you only see what really matters to the event. But then the sidebar and all the information in the back end is everything else that, for example, myself, the accounts team, the directors might want to see.
Sure. And how does it, given that it's focused purely on the financial side of things, how does it then integrate or dovetail with other platforms? Can people use this as part of a sort of a bigger tech stack operationally if they're using a other types of management platform to do other jobs?
Yeah. So essentially, what we've within events, there's sort of 11 or 12 softwares that people use. There's lots of approval apps, expense cards, spreadsheets, accounting add-ons, etc., ticket selling sites.
Yeah.
What we've done now is we've got an integration with Xero accounting software, with QuickBooks coming soon, early next year. Essentially, that automates everything that's been paid, everything that hasn't been paid. It also automates the reconciliation, and that's so that everyone, all the budget holders, can see when things are paid, when they're not, when they're due to be paid, when they're not. So again, that kind of cuts the communication out between them and the accounts department, because they won't have access to Xero, for example. In terms of the ticket sellers, we've got APIs with now Ticketmaster, Ticketweb, Eventbrite, Skiddle, and we've got C-tickets coming towards the end of the year, which is quite a big step for us, because it really then the software now becomes very automated, because the ticket sellers, the ticket counts are updated every 6 hours across the whole system. So if you're doing, for example, we've got a client that does 200 events a year, to know that their ticket counts are updated every 6 hours, they just need to load up the main report sheet. They know exactly how many tickets are being sold all the time. They know how much they've spent and committed to. If they need to cancel or move the show, they know how much that will cost already. It's all in the system. And to have the ticket count, so it's just an added automation again.
Yeah, and viability of events now is critical, really. When you think that, I'm not saying anything that no consumer already knows from just watching the news, that creatives, musicians particularly, rely on the live element now to make the money. If you're going to earn a living as a musician, particularly in the original music space, that the live sphere is where you've got to do it. There is no money in sales anymore. There's no money in streaming for them long term. So to be able to assess budgets accurately, or more accurately than traditional methods in the current climate, I guess, is more critical than ever, particularly when you reference the fact that a lot of this was developed in COVID. So not only were they relying on live as their primary source of income, but artists were desperate to come back after COVID and make them even more financially secure.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the whole point of building this was so that I could scenario plan for different types of COVID, coming back after COVID. So different types of capacity, whether it's social distancing or not, so that when it does come back, or who knew when it was going to come back, or what rules was going to come in, you could scenario plan for the 3 different types: full capacity, half capacity, or social distancing, and you'll make a profit in each. essentially we sort of bought that. We couldn't develop such a big software in time. I was a bit naive about that, but but now because of all the other struggles that the events are going through, huge increases of costs throughout the whole, the whole event,
Yeah.
and then now the cost of living crisis with the difficulty of selling tickets, people buying tickets so late, and then suddenly you don't actually know whether the event is going to be profitable until maybe a month before. It's hugely stressful times, and
Sure.
so yes, because they're scenario planning for different types of COVID, but now we're scenario planning for different types of ticket sales and lots of different variables as well.
Did it change the landscape? I mean, you may or may not know the answer to this, but did it change the landscape in terms of medium-sized events or even smaller gigs doing better than huge sort of big stadium gigs? Because when I look at some bands, I think Springsteen's about to release tickets later this week for shows in Manchester and Liverpool next year, and they're likely to be several £100s a ticket. You look at gigs at Wembley Stadium, the Oasis stuff, the Coldplay stuff, it's all several £100s. And I'm curious, that in its own right is going to put people off. And has it driven people in the last 3 years to lower or smaller, medium-sized events because the ticket price is more accessible?
I actually think it's back the other way. The touring schedules, the touring gigs, I think are selling. Are being able to sell the tickets at a high price, and they're selling out straight away. But it's more on the festival side. Everyone's ticket price is now like 200 quid. If you're under 200 quid, then the production's not as good, but you have managed to keep the price under. So I think that on the touring side, people are more willing to go for 2 hours and see their favorite artist, and willing to pay that. Whereas, you go to a festival when you're seeing 100 odd artists, but it's like a 5-day undertaking, and then you're paying for the rest, and it's very expensive now going to festivals.
Well, you're paying as well a lot of the time for artists that you don't even know are going to be there, because a lot of festivals will put their tickets on sale before artist lineups are announced.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, Glastonbury is the famous one, but I think Boomtown do it as well, and they sell out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I guess if you've got your hardcore following, again, this is the sort of the, when people think of festivals, and certainly when the consumer media, when you put on the BBC News or ITV or whatever it is, and they talk about a festival, 90% of the population will think of Glastonbury or Reading or these huge festivals, when the reality of sort of most festival operation in this country is much smaller, much more medium sized, and much more critical then from a budgetary point of view.
I mean, the competition across in festivals with the same between 5 and 10,000 cap, there's just so many out there. It's crazy. I can't think how many cancelled in the last 2 years. I think it's around 80. But even with that included, there's just too much competition out there, and there will be more cancellations next year again. But it's the loyal following. I think that's the main thing. Obviously, there are smaller festivals that don't put out a lineup until late, but the people who go there for the production, or they just know that there's going to be a good vibe and things like that.
Sure, yeah. And I guess, bringing it back to the point about what you guys do, is that if they've got a more accurate outlook on what's happening, they can make those decisions earlier. And early decisions, any event that has to be cancelled is terrible. And I've seen so many, when you look on social media, when an event has to announce a cancellation, and it might be 1, 2, 3 days before the event, the amount of sort of vitriol on social media about it, and surely you must have seen this coming. Why have you left it till today to spoil our weekend and all this? They're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't, because they announce it early. And people say, well, you haven't had a chance. You're announcing it 3 months before. You could have sold loads more. They announce it 2 days before because they've waited till the last minute to see if there's an uptake, and it's not viable. So, yeah, bringing it back to the point about your software, I'm guessing it allows people to make those decisions maybe a little bit more early in the process.
Yeah, that's exactly what it does. It gives you live information to make better decisions. So, for example, you have a 12-month period for next year's event. You start selling tickets already. You start creating the budget maybe 10 months out. At that 10-month time, you then start creating your different scenarios. So you create a scenario of I haven't sold enough tickets by Christmas. The system you've already put into this system that you might get another headliner, spend more marketing, and you try and sell more tickets than you had budget in the budget because you're
Mm.
spending more. Or you did then do a scenario where you're actually going to cut costs. You're going to cut a stage out. You haven't released a lineup yet on half the festival, so you then cut back there, and then you try and cut costs that way. But you kind of create all those different scenarios, and that Eventwise has live data from ticket sales, but also from the accounting software. So it's really easy, and you're really confident that you're making the right decision at those points.
Mm. What's the actual progress been like in terms of the timeline from launching this, beta testing it, etc., and actually then the growth? What how have
Yeah,
you
yeah.
experienced it? What's the growth been like?
Well, it took a while to build something that I felt confident was actually people were going to move away from spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are great, very malleable, and you can do whatever you like in them, but they are prone to a lot of errors. And someone not spreadsheet, savvy can actually just come in, add a row, and it messes up everything. And then you're suddenly 50 grand down. You didn't realize. So the Eventwise is very structured. It's very hard to manipulate it into trying to fit a process that is not built to fit, basically. So you can use it for like building a road out the front of your house or something. But for an event, it's built specifically for that. So yeah, it's been tough. I think the last 2 years is when we've really found that the workflow works.
Yeah.
To get to that point was pretty tough.
Does it still rely on human input in terms of putting figures in, and is there any element of sort of smart learning built in? And to give some context to that, if you take a traditional spreadsheet, you could still input a figure. Let's say you want to put £5 in as a figure, and you accidentally whack in 50 grand because your
Yeah.
zero button gets stuck on a spreadsheet. It might not flag up as necessarily an error. With a platform like yours, is there sort of an element built into it where it will flag up something that it thinks that might not be right?
Well, there's approvals across the whole system, so you wouldn't be
Right.
able to approve it. Well, unless someone's done it twice. You put 50 grand in instead of 5, then the one approving it approves that by mistake.
Yeah.
But there is that element. But there's also, when you're creating the first budget, you will always have your estimated figure, and if suddenly your budget work in progress is very, very different to that start of the year number, then you'll know you need to check it.
Yeah.
So there are approvals across different areas and things to check on.
Yeah. Just curious to whether that one thing you can't. The best tech platform in the world, if it still relies on a certain amount of human input into it, there's all human error is something that can never sort of be accounted for.
Yeah, well, there's there was one of my co-founders at the start. He said, how do we basically get them to know the budget's correct all the time?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, it's sort of, I do need them to do a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not.
you
It's not.
do need to create the budget to start with, otherwise.
Yeah. You're not creating, artificial intelligence that will manage completely their event
Yeah,
budget from beginning to end and tell them if they're right or wrong.
but yeah, I think that's on the cards though.
That would be the dream, wouldn't it?
God
And I
knows
guess,
what AI is going to do now.
well, I guess again that raises an interesting point about something like this. Is there's a huge amount of discussion going to go on. I'm certain. Well, as there has been the last couple of years at Event Tech Live about AI. And how it's being integrated into existing platforms, how new platforms will no doubt spring up as a result of the development of AI technology. Is it exactly the same in the accounting world? Is AI being used,
Yeah,
already?
there is loads of AI, and to be honest, AI has been around for a long time in the accounts world. Receipt capture, for example, is AI, and that's been around for like 15, 20 years. So this is not a new, but then you also, do you want AI to read your finances and give reports on that? Is sort of the other side of it.
Yeah.
Um, how do you know that what they're saying is correct? So it still needs sort of an accounts person to sort of check it before it goes to the directors. But in terms of the bookkeeping work, yeah, that has been sort of, there's a lot more efficiencies in that side.
Yeah, it's crazy now, isn't it? You know, I've used even sort of basic event. You know, if I work for clients as a freelance, and they might give me a, you know, a you know, like a Monzo or Revolut, you know, one of those sort of, you know, setups now where, you know, when you just go on the app, you take a photo of the receipt and it scans all the information and then inputs
Yeah,
it into
exactly.
there, and just to make the accounting easy. And it just, the whole process then has become more streamlined. You know, you don't really have an excuse for not having everything, you know,
Yeah,
up
yeah,
to date and
exactly.
accounted for. It is easy.
I mean, that is where we want to go down the route, not fully AI, but we do want sort of AI to give back feedback to the users on, you know, different types of ticket sales. Then it can feedback, you know, maybe you should do this, and little hints and things like that.
Mm,
But again, that's just on the roadmap, probably end of next year when that will come in.
yeah.
But I think that will help everyone else. But again, you're sort of bound by whatever's in the system at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And developmentally, you know, by the sounds of things, you are, you know, you've got Eventwise, but you know, if I'm understanding things correctly, you're still doing, you know, accounting and stuff for events in the live sector. So, you know, how quick can the roadmap evolve with Eventwise, or is it something that you've got it to a point where you're happy with it, but there will be a sort of a slow but steady evolution over the next few years?
Yeah, I think so. You know, we launched it sort of January last year. We've just passed 500 events in the system, which is a big milestone for us.
Mm,
It's definitely not. It's definitely a pretty big system already, and we kind of needed all of the functions for people to move over from spreadsheets. So, which is why it took so long. But right now, we do have. I still got my accountancy practice that helps support everyone on the system. We
hmm
do have sort of add-on services in terms of bookkeeping, accounting, end of year accounts, etc. within the system. But in terms of event-wise, in terms the functionality is going to be more towards the APIs with QuickBooks. We're trying to get Resident Advisor and Easel and things like that onto the ticket API. But in terms of functionality, it's more kind of supplier portals and client portals, markups, going down that kind of route because it's kind of got all the functions for events at the moment.
Fabulous. Well, congratulations on you know, on the product so far. It's been interesting as I said at the start, we've spoken loads on the podcast about, you know, tech platforms and all-in-one event management platforms that do everything, and it's interesting to speak to somebody about who has created a platform that is for such a specific role, but ultimately is, one could argue that it's the most important of all, is controlling
Yeah,
the finance and budget. We do this to make money. You know, even if you're a creative and you love your art form and you want to run a festival because of the vibe that it gives to your attendees, ultimately, you know, regardless what anybody tells you, they're all in it to make a buck, and there's no shame in that. And you know, the better we know about it, you know, the more money people can make.
yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why I had to build this, is because there's nothing out there at the
Mm,
moment. There's a couple of others that do sort of financial management, more towards sort of product launches and production agencies, but nothing that kind of brings everything all into one, where your whole team can work on one software. They can't see other departments, etc. But it brings
sure.
together the automation from Zero and the ticket APIs, and there's just nothing out there that does it. So I'm
Mm.
hoping that this will help the industry as well, not just change it.
And the critical thing to ask, if people want to find out more, where do they go?
Yeah, so you can email myself at chris@eventwise.com. You go to the website, eventwise.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, please get in touch.
Fabulous. And yeah, for people who are watching today's podcast on the Event Industry News website or on YouTube, the website eventwise.com is on the screen now. Really easy to find, though. Give those guys a Google. And as Chris said, available, on LinkedIn, I'm sure across all the platforms. It's, a couple of clicks now to find anybody on the internet. So it's never hard to track it down. But eventwise.com is the place to go, everybody. And Chris, thanks very much for joining us today. It's been really insightful talking to you.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's been fun.
Just a couple of mentions before we wrap up today's episode. Of course, first of all, for the A to Z supplier directory. If you work in the events industry and you're looking for a product or a service for your event, the chances are you will find that within the A to Z supplier directory over on eventindustrynews.com, where you can also find the latest news features, special supplements, and all that good stuff that the team at Event Industry News are doing. And a shout out as well, because we're now in October. We're in October as we record this, which means that next month sees the return of Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live to Excel London, 2 shows co-located. Please do visit their websites. Registrations for both events are now open. If you register for one or the other, you will get access to both. And with the Event Tech marketplace basically being used by anybody who works in the events sector at any level now, and sustainability being a really, really big topic regardless of the type of event that you work in, both of those shows, I dare say, will be relevant to most of the event organizers that walk through the door. So eventtechlive.com or eventsustainabilitylive.com, either or, go and register for those shows, which return to Excel London next month. Which brings us nicely and neatly to the end of today's episode. My thanks once again to my guest today, the CEO and founder of Eventwise, Mr. Chris Carter. Thanks for joining us, Chris, and we'll see everybody on the next episode of the Event Industry News podcast. Goodbye.